What is up, everybody? I am RC Gates, and today for our comic review, we are going to be taking a look at a black and white horror comic about a coastal town that is besieged by a group of bloodthirsty alien creatures. A boy, his dog, and his little friend Chomper have to save the town from the terror of the Creepsters. So join us as we take a look at this comic. Alrighty, so this is Creepsters, a black and white horror comic put out by Nasser Rabadi. Some of you may know Nasser from his other horror stories that he's put out both in and out of comicsgate. And this is actually a pleasant surprise to me because for a creator who is as young as Nasser is, it is good to see a well put together story, and especially to this quality. Now, this book also came with the ashcan Tales of the Creepsters, and also this little guy that you saw in the opening. Pretty much just a plushie of Chomper, who's one of the monsters in the story, but he's one of the good guys. And while he's not a comic, he is still a good product and a good accessory to this comic haul, I guess you can call it. So he's just going to be off to the side there while I take a look at these. And I actually did a review of him in one of my live streams if you want to go and check that out. So first we are going to be getting into the story of the main Creepsters book. And I'm going to be covering both of these in this review because they are all one story. So we're going to jump into the story of Creepsters. And just let me get to the first page. Alright, so the main origin of these monsters is that there's an unknown cluster of eggs. They're sort of like floating around in the sea. And they just happen to end up in the same area as a shark fight and a plunging alien asteroid. And because of that conflict and environment that these eggs were, fertilized in, they give birth to the Creepsters. And these Creepsters are then eventually unleashed on a town in a coastal area. So after we're introduced to the eggs, at least, we're then introduced with the human character, which is Max and his dog. And the story pretty much lays out Max's ambitions of finding pirate treasure, and also his older sister, who's pretty much a jerk to him, whose name is Emma. And the story pretty much follows them with their different stories and how they both encounter the Creepsters throughout their time in this town. So Max is going to the beach and he's going to, like I said, look for pirate treasure with this old man character by the name of Mr. Jenkins. And during that time, he finds one of these eggs, which ends up being Chomper. And Chomper becomes his friend, and all that time Max doesn't really see a problem with a tiny creature with a appetite that a normal child would be terrified by. Because the moment he meets Chomper, Chomper eats a pelican. So I don't know about you guys, but I would not want to be anywhere close to a creature like that. But it's it's like a story from the 80s where this sort of stuff just happens all the time, and the kids are just way too accepting of weird happenings. Like, the story reminds me of something out of like the 80s where they had like Goonies and stuff like that. Like they'd be looking for like pirate treasure, and there'd be some sort of like paranormal happenings that would be going on, and it would be all like horror based. And it's actually quite refreshing because I actually really like the feeling of the Goonies whenever I watch that movie, and I get a lot of the same feelings with this book. So, Max meets Chomper. He decides to take Chomper in as his pet, or his second pet after his dog. And you pretty much get introduced to Chomper's appetite throughout these couple pages and his different powers, I guess. Because he at one point jumps into Max's dog and ends up taking control of his body at some point, but Max doesn't know that. So it gives you the thought that you're definitely not supposed to trust Chomper because he is a wild animal. Well, animal at best, alien at worst, and it keeps the mystery going as to what exactly he is and what he's capable of, while letting you know all that stuff and keeping Max in the dark. So that's quite an interesting thing to see as it plays out through these pages. At the same time, Max's sister Emma is going through her relationship troubles, and again, stuff that you would see from like an 80s movie. And it would be like she's dealing with her dumb boyfriend who is more of a meathead than anyone else in the comic, and it's just like, oh, he's just there because he's the stereotypical jockey guy. And at the midway point of this comic, you really don't know how these two stories are going to combine, but at the end, it all really does pull together quite well, because throughout the comic, the other creepsters and other creatures are periodically popping up throughout the story, and they are leading to bloody chaos, and dead bodies are piling up everywhere, and innocent people are getting murdered, and all sorts of crazy happenings. And then there's also instances where the creepsters are just causing just being general nuisances, which I guess if you look into it, it can be very harmful, but it's also presented as quite comical. Let's see if I can give a good example of that. Okay, so here's one of the creepsters who appears whenever Emma's with her boyfriend, and he goes up behind this strong man and whacks him on the head with a giant mallet. And then in the next panel, the guy's head is sort of it's sort of like an accordion, I guess, and it's not something that you would expect, but it will make you laugh because you'll see it in the background, and it's funny to see. But yeah, we have this as the creepsters are making themselves more known. And then there's also one of the more infamous parts of the comic when the creepster comes into a shower and murders somebody, pretty much something like straight out of a horror movie. And it is quite quite evocative of like the usual horror movie tropes. So that's definitely something that's cool to see. I'm always a fan of a shower scene in a horror movie, don't get me wrong. But yeah, we have all of that stuff taking place throughout the story. I'm not going to get into spoilers, but if you know how usual 80s, maybe PG-13 horror movies go, then you'll pretty much guess how this one ends. Except for a twist at the end, which I wasn't expecting, and I'm not going to tell because I want you guys to experience it for yourselves. But at the end of that story, there is a showdown between the two different factions of the Creepsters. You have Chomper and some good ones, and you have them going up against a very super powered Creepster because of various different things that have combined to create these monsters. It's both supernatural and also natural, and there's some amount of witch magic that also comes into it. It's a combination of a bunch of different things, and it's something that I've not seen utilized as much in comics. Usually you only see one thing that causes monsters, whether it be supernatural or natural, but this combines all of that as well as various elements of like witchcraft. So that's quite cool and unique. Now, let's get into the characters. Let's start with Max. And Max is pretty much your regular kid who is just one, like, if you go to like again, I keep mentioning 80s movies, but this kid really does make me think of the Goonies, because he's going down to the beach to search for pirate treasure, and that's what happens to bring him to Chomper. And he's a kid who just likes his adventure, and he keeps his own secrets because that's what kids do in the 80s. And it just leads to more trouble down the line until everything builds up and he becomes the hero of the story. So he's a charming little bugger. So he's actually a good main character for this story, because you're looking at it through the innocent eyes of a child, and he wants to see Chomper as his friend, which most people want to do because Chomper has big teeth and will eat anything. But it's good to see his interactions with the variety of people that are in the story, and he's a good character to move the story along so that you don't want to see anything bad happen to him or his family, regardless of how annoying his sister is, which we can get into her as well. And she is pretty much just like what the usual older sister is. She doesn't want to be bothered by her pipsqueak of a brother, and she's one who seems pretty egotistical and will focus mainly on her relationship, which, if you're looking at it from the mindset of Max, you don't give two shits. You just want to see what all is going to happen in the story. But it's to be expected based on the type of story that this is. As the story goes on, she does become more relatable as a character, which is good because it's a good way of showing a character arc. And at the end, it does show her actual connection with Max. So the power of family is very strong in this comic. I do like that. And now we're going to get into Chomper. Now, Chomper is a monster. That is definite. And he's also charming, while also being terrifying as all hell. Because whenever he jumps at you and tries to eat you like he does with this bird, no normal person would be like, oh yes, I want to bring this thing back to my house because this thing just ate a bird out of the air. And oh yeah, I totally want to be bringing this thing home and feeding it. But whenever you're an adventurous, dumb kid like Max, that's the first thing that comes to your mind. And the ridiculous of it just makes it even more funny and makes it into a more interesting story as it progresses. Because with this thing being a wild animal or creature or being, you don't know what he's going to do next. Is he going to eat Max? Is he going to side with his alien brethren? Or what is he going to do? You honestly can't tell as the story progresses because he is written like a wild animal who is being gradually domesticated. But you don't know how domesticated that's going to be until you get to the end. And he does he does show throughout the story that he can be protective. He can fight whenever he needs to. And he's also one who's a bit more under control than his fellow Creepsters. But you always have it in the back of your head, what is this little thing going to do? And that's what keeps him interesting, because you don't know what he's going to do. You're just hoping it's going to be the right thing. Alrighty. Now, there are other characters, like the old man character that Max hangs out with and is looking for pirate treasure. And he doesn't really factor into the story as much of as just being a plot point for Max to get to the beach. But he's funny in the same way as like Doc Brown is funny in Back to the Future, because he's just a crazy old guy. He doesn't have any like inventions like Doc does, but he is just like the usual crazy old guy that you can expect to see in those stories. And various other people are also in the story, but they're not really worth mentioning, as they're just cannon fodder for the Creepsters to eat and devour and murder. But yeah, all of them serve a purpose. They're just not really important to cover in the review. But let's move on to the art. The art is quite good. Whenever I take a look at black and white comics, a lot of times, at least in the ones that I've seen, there is not much or not as much contrast as I would hope there to be. With this one, if it is, like even taking a look at this first page, seeing the contrast between the very bright moon and the completely black water, it makes it seem like it is nighttime, and it looks like it's nighttime. It looks very good. And all of this stuff that progresses, it shows, like even this map of the United States that's outlined with all of the lights that can be seen from space. It's something that I haven't seen that done in a comic, and it made me stop and think that is actually very cool because I haven't seen it done in a black and white comic before. But enough with the backgrounds. What about the character design and all of that art? Personally, I actually really like it. The perspective seems good. The characters all have their own unique designs. They certainly seem to match their ages quite well. Max looks like a young kid. Emma looks like the grown-up sister. And everyone else, it either seem like they are and everyone else seems to look quite good as well. Like even with the old man who's searching for treasure and the other people who are cannon fodder, they all have their own unique looks and they all have identifying characteristics to them that are all shown in this art. And then we have the sort of fight scenes and also the murder scenes. And I want to show you guys the first Creepster murder. So you have all this stuff. It's it's a surprisingly tasteful shower scene, which is something that will mean that this video won't be age restricted. Thank goodness. And you see it progressing along just fine. Nothing too crazy. And then bloodshed and horror. And even with all of the movement that is going on with these pages, there's always a constant feeling of chaos and movement. So even with all of this stuff, there's motion blur at times to show just how fast these things are moving. Like this. This is something that perfectly encapsulates what a horror comic should look like. Because this looks gruesome, it looks horrific, and it is absolutely what you would expect to see if there was a tiny creature with gigantic teeth running around ripping people up. So, that is art that I have not seen in most of the comics that I've gotten. So, that is really good. Now, let's get to the writing. As I've already said, the writing for Creepsters is actually done quite well. I have not gotten any of Nasser's previous books, but this story is written very much like an 80s movie, like one of those PG-13 horror movies where you'll have the certain gruesome aspects, but you'll also have like that charming family tale of a boy and his dog trying to figure out what exactly is going on with the town and this little creature that he found down at the beach. And at the end, the power of family brings it all together and makes everything good again. That sort of stuff is immediately what made me think of 80s horror movie, especially like Goonies, and having that adventure aspect to it as well. So the writing of the story is quite good, and I definitely would want to see more of the Creepsters story. The one thing that I would make a little bit of changes to And this does have slightly to do with art as well. But with the caption boxes, there's sometimes whenever it will be in a black caption box with white text, and then they'll just, out of nowhere, be just white text. Like in this area right here. It'll be like, the building blocks of life, combine, evolve. And then your eye is looking for that black text box, but then it's just white text. And you're in the danger of missing those points in those panels because you don't know what to look for. Your eye is going to instantly go from combine, evolve to unknown radiation, not these other places. And there's a couple times in the comic that it does that, and it does throw you off a tiny bit, but it happens so little that it is perfectly acceptable. Just something to keep in mind. And also, there are some times where something like an attack may be happening in the background of a shot, and it may not give much detail to it, but I'm willing to look past that because the story is supposed to be centering on what is in the forefront of the shot. The Creepsters are supposed to be going around through various parts of the story, even sometimes in the backgrounds, and you're just meant to be searching for them. Now, that can be a good thing, that can be a bad thing, depending on how you look at it. And it may be something to take a look at, or it may be something to just disregard. It's up to you, but for me, I am okay with it, though I would like to see some of those attacks with a little bit more focus. Now, before we get into the interest, I'm going to very quickly go over the ashcan. And this is the Tales of the Creepsters. This is again black and white, and it's just a very quick story talking about, or telling the story of one of the Creepsters that gets into a grocery store and falls in love with a coconut. Oh my, okay. It sounds extremely weird, and I haven't said that out loud, and it just, oh my. Oh, the stories that can be told. But anyways, it does manage to tell of the ferocity of these creatures and of just how little of a circumstance could set them off. Like this one falling for a coconut. And that leads to several different people dying very, very gruesome deaths. Because for some reason they come into contact with that coconut, and he just takes offense to that. And all those people end up dying. So it's a good little side story that it's good to have if you want to continue staying in this world. And it gives you a little bit more of an idea of what the Creepsters are capable of. So now I'm going to get into the interest behind this. Personally, I am quite interested to see where this story goes. I'm not going to get into the ending of the story, but I do want to see more of the Creepsters, and I want to see what is going to become of them, because they are interesting little monsters that have very unique powers. Each of them have their own quirks to them. I think some of them even have like psychological powers. So being able to maybe carry on the stories with those other ones, it definitely opens up the world to many different ideas that Nasser can put into a sequel. So I will definitely be checking those out whenever they are released, and I would definitely recommend that you guys do that too. So, what is my final rating on Creepsters and Tales of the Creepsters? Well, I would have to give this one a well-deserved popcorn level, because this made me feel like I was watching a movie like Goonies, like I've already said. And I personally really like movies like that. I like stories like that. And being able to see that put into a comic book form and have that evoke those same emotions from me, I definitely applaud Nasser for how good this story came out. And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing more of it. Well, that is all that I have for you guys today. Please make sure to like the video, comment what your thoughts are on this comic, and also make sure to subscribe to the channel so you can see more videos just like this one. Now, if you guys would please excuse me, I need to go and find this guy something to eat. Peace out.